Hi, and welcome to Check Your Thread, a podcast about sewing more sustainably. My name's Zoe, and I'm obsessed with sewing. I've been blogging about it for over 13 years and am the creator and host of the popular Handmade wardrobe challenge, Me Made May. But like many people, I've become increasingly concerned about the climate crisis and the way my lifestyle contributes to it. So in this podcast, I'll be nerding out about making clothes whilst exploring how to minimise the negative impact that it may have. I really hope you'll join me on this journey. Hello, happy end of October, lovely listeners. How are you doing? Have you been doing any making this week? Honestly, this week has been a write-off for me, sewing-wise. My kids are at home because it's the half-term holidays, plus it's my birthday week, so I've had a couple of nice days out. And we have an adorable new little time sap in the form of a new kitten. So a lot of my time has been spent tickling his fluffy little chin, to be honest. We've wanted to get a cat for absolutely ever, but it wasn't until 6 months ago that we finally moved to a home with a garden that we felt would be safe to let a cat out into. Over the last 6 months, we've tried to adopt a cat from a rescue shelter, but it just wasn't happening. Either they weren't answering their phone, or they never returned our voicemails, or they didn't have any cats that they deemed suitable for living with children. So in the end, we bought a kitten. And now we have little Dave living with us. Of course, getting a kitten has involved buying a bunch of new stuff, a lot of it plastic. But I did manage to get food and water bowls and a soft blanket for him from the charity shops at least. In fact, my charity shopping game has been on point this week. I got 2 new winter coats for my little boy, which were very much needed. Plus, I got him some future-sized school shoes in great condition. I got a lovely vintage glass vase for my collection, some more teaspoons that we seem to keep losing. I got my kids some new books and games, and I got a pair of curtains that I plan to make some dungarees out of, and the cat stuff that I mentioned, and a lampshade for our hallway. Speaking of sustainable shopping, yesterday I visited a lovely refill eco-living type shop and finally found some refillable face moisturiser. So for ages I've been buying the same face moisturiser from a company that's meant to be quite sustainable, and I got it specifically because it came in a kind of easily recyclable pot. But recently they changed the packaging to be less recyclable and I'm just not happy about that. So the one that I found yesterday is by a brand called Upcircle, that comes in a glass pot with an aluminium lid. So more recyclable than a plastic container, plus it's refillable at the shop that I got it in, so the packaging should last for years and years anyhow. I also picked up some sachets of powder. Actually, I think it's powder, I haven't tried it yet, that you add to water in a squirty bottle that becomes multi-surface cleaner. So the idea being that you're using less plastic and it makes more sense because you're not paying for a product that's largely water anyway. The idea being that you're using less plastic and it makes more sense because you're not paying for a product that's largely water anyway. I think that they work out cheaper than the equivalent would be of a regular bottle of multi-surface cleaner too, which is good because I do think a lot about how a lot of these quote-unquote eco-swaps, like for example the solid shampoo bar that I mentioned in last week's intro, how those can be prohibitively expensive for many people. So thank you so much for all the lovely feedback you sent this week. Lots of lovely messages from people saying they've loved recent episodes. Loads of people appreciating the amazing info that Amy Taylor shared about natural dyeing in last week's episode. Plus lots of people loving the conversation with Judith from Sew Over 50. And a number of people letting me know how much the Sewing versus Kids episode meant to them. I had a lovely message via Instagram from listener Sarah saying that although her situation is a bit different in that she's caring for an elderly parent rather than for young kids, she really related to a lot of what was included in that episode. So that's wonderful that people are connecting with that. So a quick favour, if you will. If there's been an episode of the podcast that you have particularly enjoyed, would you please tell someone about it this week? Whether that takes the form of texting a sewing friend about it, or telling someone in a real life conversation, or a tweet, or a story on Instagram for your followers to see. It'd be so useful to help more sustainably minded people discover Check Your Thread. Okay, let's talk about episode 14. This week is a solo episode in which I share lots of ideas for quick and cheap sewing projects that would make great gifts. I am, of course, releasing this episode now because a certain C word is on the horizon, but this episode contains heaps of ideas that are equally applicable for other celebrations that involve gift giving at any point of the year. As I mentioned in this episode, all the links to the things I talk about are in the show notes. Right, let's crack on! Before I get stuck into all the project ideas I want to share, I need to make the following statement. I only condone making presents for anyone if you absolutely want to, not because you think you should. And only if the recipient has a history of appreciating handmade items and values your time and skills. If the proposed recipient is a child, then I only condone making them gifts if their grown-up has a history of that. Okay? Cool. A handmade present can consist of anything, of course. If you want to go all out and make something super special for someone that is really time consuming or costs loads in materials, then that is totally up to you. What I'm talking about today is ideas for makers who are busy but want to flex their sewing skills to make a gift or two without it taking an age or costing a mint. All these ideas should take 2 to 3 hours maximum to make, depending on your level of sewing experience or how speedy you are. So theoretically, each of these projects could be made in an evening. They should cost you very little too. A lot of these projects use patterns or tutorials that are free, and pretty much all of them can be made from scraps or leftover fabric or even unwanted clothing. To get through these ideas with some kind of logic, I've split them up into 4 groups. Gifts for makers, simple accessories and clothing, homeware, and gifts for kids. All the projects mentioned will be linked in the show notes, which are available on the website checkyourthread.com. So there's no need to scrabble around to find a pen whilst you're listening to this episode. Okay, let's get started. I don't know about you, but almost without exception, my favourite people to make stuff for are other makers. Even if their crafty discipline isn't sewing, they understand the skill and time that goes into making stuff, and they really treasure the item that you've made them. People who make have many facets of their lives, of course, so would appreciate items from the other categories too. However, here are some ideas for gifts that you could make for a maker to help them with their making. So a tool roll might be a cool gift for all sorts of makers. You could make them to contain various tools, including paintbrushes, knitting needles, crochet hooks, ceramic carving tools, lino cutting tools, and many more. You'd need a small amount of medium weight woven fabric, for example denim or canvas. I found a great easily adaptable free tutorial by the Book Hut. A lovely bag to contain their project and equipment might be a really thoughtful gift for a maker as well. And it might stop your crafty friend from carrying their knitting project around in an old plastic bag. The Stow Bag pattern by Grainline Studios is a paid-for pattern that looks like a great stash buster, and it comes in 2 sizes that could be excellent for keeping knitting, crochet, embroidery type projects in. And you could make it even more quickly by skipping the interior pockets. There are, of course, heaps of different bag and pouch tutorials out there that might be more suitable for the maker in your life, depending on the size, shape and volume of their equipment for projects. For crafts that involve messy stuff, consider sourcing some waterproof fabric or vinyl. There are so many different waterproof fabrics available for home sewers these days, and you probably only need to source a small piece. Alternatively, you can get fun printed vinyl type stuff that's usually meant for covering tables from homeware and hardware shops that are usually sold by the meter. If the person that you're making for is a sewer, it could be a great opportunity to make them some lovely items to level up their sewing game, whether they're a beginner or if they've been at it for a while. The quickest project would probably be a pincushion. There are hundreds of tutorials out there, from simple square baby pillows to ones that are shaped like animals or apples or something. You could make one that has an elastic strap attached so that it can be worn on the wrist. That might be really useful. Sewers might also appreciate a thread catcher or a thread bin that can hang just below the sewing machine, or a simple apron with pockets for their pattern cutting and marking tools perhaps. Okay, so simple accessories and basic clothing are usually really fun to make for other people and can easily be tailored to their tastes and requirements. I've mentioned hats, particularly bucket hats, before in episode 6 as one of my very favourite uses for scraps and leftover fabric. A bucket hat pattern can become a sun hat when made in woven cotton or linen, a rain hat when made in something waterproof or at least splash-proof on the outside, or even an on-trend fluffy winter hat if you make it in Sherpa or some sort of sheepskin-looking fabric. There are so many adult and kid size patterns out there. The Sorrento bucket hat is by LB Textiles, and that's a low cost pattern that raises money for good causes. Plus there's the Sandcastle bucket hat, which is a free pattern by Waves and Wild that includes kid sizes also. The Oliver and S bucket hat pattern is probably my favourite for kids because it's got a really nice oval shape to it. A small amount of fantastic fabric can look really impactful when made into a simple bag. For example, there's the Autumn Bag tutorial, which is free and available from Merchant & Mills. Plus, you can buy ready-made handles to make it even more fancy and even quicker to make. I made a couple of these from some ripstop fabric for myself and a friend that I used to share an allotment with, and we used them for taking our tools down to the plot-in and then bringing back any veg we dug up. Another fab-looking one that I want to try is the By Tilly pattern from By Grazila Fabrics. It's a sweet shopper style that's got like knotted handles and needs about 1 metre of 2 different fabrics. It's also reversible, which is fabulous if you're not sure which fabric your recipient will prefer. Simple pouches and cases of various types go down very well and usually just require a zip and not very much fabric. There are hundreds of patterns and tutorials out there, so I haven't linked to any specifically, but pretty much everyone needs a case or container of some description for their belongings, whether that be a pencil case or a makeup case, a jewellery case, or something for keeping medicines together when you travel and so on. A handmade case or pouch can also be combined with another little gift like a couple of nice new pens, or if it's intended to be a makeup case, you could whip up some of those reusable makeup remover pads, or maybe make a nice hair scrunchie to add to it. Speaking of which, I love making a few hair scrunchies when I'm in a pinch for a gift for someone with long hair. Melly Sews has a great tutorial if you're not sure where to start. There are, of course, heaps of other types of hairbands you can make from woven or knit fabric scraps also. Even if they're not the recipient's style as such, they can be so useful for keeping your hair out of your face. One of my absolutely favourite things to make for pretty much anyone of any age or gender is mittens. And you can make those out of unwanted knitwear, especially ones that have been slightly felted in the wash, or even some that have had moth holes and you can kind of cut around those bits. I've made so many pairs of mittens using a pattern that I bought from Etsy from about 10 years ago. They're double layered, so warmer than any other mittens I've ever worn. I can't find that exact pattern anymore that I have, but I'll link to one in the show notes that's very similar and comes in multiple adult and kid sizes. If you know the rough size of the person you're wanting to sew for and you have a larger piece of fabric available, making a simple garment might prove an impressive present. The Mandy Boat Tee, for example, is a free pattern that's by Tezuti for 31-inch bust to 45-inch bust, and it's a really wearable boxy style knit top. I haven't tried it, but the Lunar Tank pattern by Helen's Closet, which is another free one, could be a good option for someone to wear in warmer weather. It's a flowy knit vest or tank top that is graded up to a 60-inch bust. Or if you have some nice flowy woven fabric in your stash, a skirt using the Dominique pattern by Tilly and the buttons would pack a real punch as a gift, but not actually take very long to make. And finally in this category, if someone you know is still wearing disposable face masks or their reusable face masks are looking a bit tatty by now, making them a couple of new fun face masks might be a really thoughtful gift. So the third category of speedy gifts is items to make for someone's home. So like accessories and simple clothing, homeware items are equally customizable to the taste and style of the recipient. And arguably, homeware items are even more fun to make because you can potentially be freer and bolder with your style and fabric choices because you're not effectively asking the person to walk around with the item on their body in public. It's a great opportunity to raid your stash for forgotten lengths of fabric, colourful scraps or even unwanted garments and reimagine them as items for around the home. So here's some specific project ideas. So cushions. Buy a basic cushion pad, then make a simple cushion cover the same size and ta-da! Lovely gift. The cover can be made out of pretty much any fabric that feels okay to lean against. You really only need a small amount and it's super easy to match something with someone's style. The special fabric can be just on the front with a plain back if you're limited in quantity. It could be wild and jazzy or super simple and minimalist, retro or vintage or anything at all. But if you don't have anything suitable that's big enough, you can do some really simple piecing together of a few coordinating scraps. And unwanted garments can look amazing as cushion covers. Think about using unwanted knitwear for cosy textures or think about button-up shirts including the buttons and button stands for a really fun look. For the simplest, quickest finish, go for an overlapped envelope back. Or if you want to get fancier, you could use a zip, buttons, press studs or Velcro if you wish. So square cushions are obviously the easiest to make, but you could try to make some other simple shapes like raindrops or clouds, especially if you're making them for a kid's room. The less glamorous cousin of the cushion project could be a simple draft excluder. So that's something that sits on the floor at the bottom of a door to prevent drafts. You could even use scrap fabrics to stuff it so it's even cheaper and relies on less virgin materials to produce. I've personally never made one, but fabric storage baskets look really effective and look pretty quick to make as well. They would be so useful for tidying desks, side tables, bedside tables, craft areas, or for storing TV remotes or phone chargers or whatever. And like cushions, they could be bold and bright or super simple and understated and everything in between, depending on fabric choice. I'd recommend that you do an online search for ideas and find a tutorial because there are loads out there. Personally, I really like the ones that are made from old jeans. There are heaps of ideas for kitchen-related gifts to whip up also. I've mentioned aprons before in the gifts ideas for makers, but a great-looking apron for someone who enjoys cooking is a really thoughtful gift. If they've already got an apron, it's possible that their current one is looking a bit grubby, so a new one could be a welcome upgrade. There are heaps of free apron tutorials out there, but a couple of lovely paid-for patterns include the apron pattern by Tazuti that has a cool tunic crossback style, and the Workaday pattern by Merchant & Mills. I've mentioned this project recently, but oven mitts are a great and very useful scrap busting present. I've recently tested and reviewed the free oven mitt pattern by Bombazine, which I really love. And pot holders are a variation on the oven mitt that you might prefer to make. So sticking with the food theme, for a table, a simple set of matching cloth napkins might elevate someone's mealtimes. You just need about 1 metre of soft woven cotton or linen fabric, and you cut it into squares and hem around the edges. If your sewing machine can do some fancy stitches, this could be a good opportunity to play with those whilst hemming the sides. Making placemats could also be a nice option. You could make them rectangular or circular or anything your heart desires, I guess. One final food-related project I saw recently was some awesome fabric bowl covers. There's a free tutorial by Hearth and Vine. So these are a washable, reusable alternative to cling film or foil for covering food in the fridge or to keep insects off when you're eating outside. Okay, if there are any kids in your life that you'd normally buy a gift for, then there are loads of quick projects that you could whip up for them instead. I'm going to link in the show notes to a blog post that I wrote called 40 Free Sewing Patterns for Gifts for Kids that includes a lot of the patterns and tutorials I'm going to mention here, but there are lots more, so it's worth having a look for further ideas. So making clothes for kids is lots of fun for those of us who sew, but let's be honest, unless the fabric you are choosing has a print of their favourite cartoon characters or favourite animal on, for the child, opening a gift that is an item of clothing can be a bit of a disappointment. If you have decided to make them a garment anyway and need to buy fabric to make it with, there are a heap of incredible printed fabrics out there these days, both on woven and knit bases, that kids will love. And if you do choose to go down that route, you can still do some stash or scrap busting by buying a small amount of the new fabric and combining it with contrasting solid fabric. You could apply the printed fabric just to the front of a t-shirt or sweatshirt, for example, or just on the pockets of some shorts perhaps. I mentioned some great sewing patterns for kids in episode 6 of this podcast, which is about my favourite scrap busting projects. Plus I'll link to a blog post that I wrote about free sewing patterns for kids if you're looking for some budget-friendly suggestions. There are so many things that you can make for kids to play with that are quick and cheap. Fancy dress items such as capes, character face masks, crowns and so on are easy to make and can even be personalised to include the child's initials if you have some extra time. So you could take inspiration from generic themes like superheroes, animals, pirates, monsters, dinosaurs, wizards, magicians, astronauts, doctors, kings and queens, fairy tales and so on. But finding out what types of games and books and so on are the kids' current favourites will increase the chances of the item seeing lots of use. If the kid in question is obsessed with farmers, for example, you could run with that. My son is currently really into the idea of dressing up as a giant snail for some reason. So it might be something that you literally have not even thought of. Remember, kids have fantastic imaginations, so you really don't need to go to town and make a really detailed or highly accurate look for a costume item to help them in their role play. If you're looking for some specific tutorials, here are a few free options that I found that might start you off. There's a simple but effective Batman costume tutorial by Fleece Fun, a lovely pom-pom tutu skirt tutorial by Brit & Co, and a dress-up apron by It's Always Autumn, which can be made to look like various princesses depending on which colours and details you pick, and that's sized for 2 to 8 years old. Some other play items could be a little apron and or an oven mitt for playing cooking games. As a basis, you could use the Easy Apron tutorial by Scattered Thoughts of a Crafty Mum, which the child could of course use for actual cooking projects as well. And Made for Mermaids has a free pattern for a kiddie oven mitt. And if you know the dimensions of their favourite soft toy, a basic little sleeping bag that they can put their toy to bed in can be a lovely thing to give. There are many accessories that you can make for kids also that can be fun and useful at the same time. I've included lots of those in the 40 free sewing patterns for gifts for kids blog post. In there's cute and simple drawstring backpacks, pencil rolls, characterful shoulder bags, headbands, bow ties, beanie hats, zip purses and more. Personally, if I ever have to make a little gift for a child with long hair, I usually just make 3 scrunchies from pretty fabric scraps and call it a day. So gift wrapping! So whether you've decided to make a gift or buy one, consider reusable wrapping options. The easiest option would be to simply wrap the gift in a piece of nice fabric or a scarf or something and tie it up with a length of ribbon. Only marginally more involved, but arguably slightly more elevated, could be to emulate the Japanese furoshiki wrapping cloth techniques. I'll add a link in the show notes. Something a bit more time consuming than those to make but will save you time at the wrapping stage could be to make reusable gift bags by using a drawstring bag tutorial. If you batch sew a load in a variety of sizes, that could sort you out for wrapping for yonks. And then hopefully the recipients will use them again when they have a gift to give to somebody, hopefully saving lots of single-use wrapping in the future. If you have any quick, simple or cheap project ideas that you like to use for making gifts, please let me know. You can do that via Instagram or email, and then we can do a follow-up episode in the future. Thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this episode and are left feeling inspired. For more info about the podcast, including show notes for this and every episode, head to checkyourthread.com. I'd love to hear from you, so if you have any comments, questions or ideas for future episodes, please get in touch by emailing zoe@checkyourthread.com or find me on Instagram @checkyourthread. Massive thanks to Patrick Potter for production support, to Sylvia Seller for the awesome logo design, and to Simon at Palm Skin Productions for the music. This ad-free podcast would not be possible without listener support, so if you feel you are able, please consider signing up to the Check Your Thread Patreon. For the equivalent of buying me a coffee each month, you'll be making it possible to continue producing regular episodes. Links can be found in the show notes and on the website checkyourthread.com. I hope you'll listen again next week. Until then, take care. Bye!